We begin with action taken against a single former federal worker. Retired chair of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley. Overnight, the Pentagon revoked his security detail and his security clearance. In addition, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth directed the Inspector General to launch an investigation into Milley's conduct. This could lead to an eventual demotion, even in retirement. Why? Well, General Milley, who was initially nominated by Trump himself, is seen to have stood up to him, including following the insurrection. Trump later suggested it was treasonous, that it, quote, times gone by, the punishment would have been death. This morning, it does seem the president is getting his retribution. Let's get right to CNN's Oren Lieberman at the Pentagon with these overnight moves. Good morning, Oren.
Good morning, John. President Donald Trump has long had it out for General Mark Milley, and this through his new Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, on his second day at the job. Looks like it's part of that getting back at him. Hegseth and the Pentagon put out a statement late last night saying that he'd ordered that his security detail and security clearance be removed. Milley has had a security detail ever since the U.S. assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Milley was one of those under threat from the Iranians, as were several other former Trump administration officials. Milley has also been more openly critical of Trump, calling him a fascist, and in this final speech as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, offering this barely veiled criticism of Trump.
We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator, and we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die to protect it.
We have reached out to Milley for comment. It's also worth noting that Milley is not the only former Trump administration official who's had his security detail and clearance revoked. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton, former CIA Director Mike Pompeo, and others have been through the same thing.
We should note, Oren, I do believe that General Milley was one of the people who received a preemptive pardon from outgoing President Biden. So this Inspector General investigation, what could that lead to?
Milley did receive a pardon in the final hours of the Biden administration. Now, that protects him from criminal prosecution and prosecution under military law. So there isn't that much in the legal perspective that you can go after him for because of that pardon. But this Inspector General investigation could try to strip Milley of rank, try to demote him after his retirement and his more than 40 years in the service. The question is, what is the conduct here that's questionable? And that was not offered in the statement. No rationale was given. Trump and others have tried to go after Milley for a pair of phone calls with his Chinese counterpart in the closing months of the first Trump administration. Trump even posted on Truth Social that it would have been, those calls were treasonous and would have been a reason for a death penalty in earlier times. Milley has testified openly about those, and they were coordinated with the Secretaries of Defense and the national security agencies. They could also try to go after him for the Afghanistan withdrawal, but John, it's worth remembering that Milley opposed that withdrawal, and it was only carried out because first Trump and then Biden ordered it.
These are important distinctions. Oren Lieberman at the Pentagon this morning. A lot going on there. Keep us posted.
Milley was asked about Trump's treason comment back in 2023, and this is what he told 60 Minutes.
As much as these comments are directed at me, it's also directed at the institution of the military. And there's 2.1 million of us in uniform. If we're willing to die for that document, if we're willing to deploy to combat, if we're willing to lose an arm, a leg, an eye, to protect and support and defend that document and protect the American people, then we're willing to live for it too.
Joining me now to discuss, Stephen Collinson, CNN Politics senior reporter, Sabrina Rodriguez, national political reporter for The Washington Post, Megan Hayes, Democratic strategist and former director of message planning for the Biden White House, and Matt Gorman, Republican strategist and former senior advisor to Tim Scott's presidential campaign. Good morning to everybody. I mean, there are so many points of friction between Trump and Milley over the years that it's hard to pinpoint exactly which one this is coming from. There was also, of course, the time that Milley joined Trump when they walked across Lafayette Square during the Black Lives Matter protests, and Milley later apologized for appearing with Trump in that moment. Then there was, of course, the fact that he testified to the January 6th committee. But Matt, this is a general that Trump appointed to the Joint Chiefs. Do Republicans share his disdain for him, or is this Is this a personal vendetta?
I think probably a little both. I think Republicans do share this disdain for him, and actually in some other ways too. One of the big critiques you hear among Republicans is Milley's leadership on Afghanistan. It was an absolute disaster, total misreading of the situation during the Biden years, and I think that is a huge point of contention, especially among people who did not serve with Trump. I also think some of these actions by Trump dovetail quite nicely with, I think, more Republican priorities just in general, where I think I've talked about this a lot with you, Megyn, as well. I think Republicans are keen to get back to a time where there's a more clear civilian-led military control. With Mattis and Lloyd Austin, you had generals that had just recently come out of retirement, had to get a waiver on the 10-year essentially, cooling off period, for lack of a better term, before assuming the position of Secretary of Defense. I think that is something they want to go back against. And also, candidly, the extension of these security clearances is something Republicans have wanted to pull back for a long time. So personal might also dovetail with the political here.
Stephen Collinson, Hegseth has also ordered an inspector general to review Hegseth's, quote, conduct, which is quite a broad mandate for an inspector general, and also ironic considering that Trump recently just fired all of the agency inspectors general. So how exactly will this work?
Right, I guess inspector generals are great when they're doing something you want, when they potentially, lift the lid on corruption or abuses of power. Perhaps they're not so good, but I take your point about the political generals, and I think that's a very good point. But at the same time, it's hard to look at this and not see personal retribution on behalf of the president, especially when you view it in the context of the withdrawn security details for former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. It's interesting that this, along with the executive orders on the transgender troops, that's the first thing that Hegseth presided over as soon as he got to the Pentagon. So it does suggest that clearly he's going to spend his tenure perhaps advancing the president's social goals. But one thing I would say is that China and Russia, those generals and grizzled defense officials that Hegseth is going to have to deal with, are watching this, and they see a Pentagon that's fighting against itself and not mustered against America's enemies. Well,
there was notably a very large chasm between Trump and his generals in the first term, so much so that there was a book written about it by Susan Glasser and Peter Baker, and they reported that Milley actually threatened to resign, drafted a resignation letter that he then unsent. And that letter, according to Glasser and Baker, said, "It is my belief that you were doing great and irreparable harm to my country. I believe that you have made a concerted effort over time to politicize the United States military. I thought that I could change that. I've come to the realization that I cannot." Of course, that was drafted by Milley and then unsent, reportedly. But Sabrina, how high are the stakes if you're a general in Trump's second administration and you see some of the actions that he's taken now?
I mean, I think there has to be huge alarm for generals right now in the military, for anyone in the military, to see the politicization about this. I mean, to be clear, though, this is not surprising. This is something that Donald Trump promised. I think a lot of what we're discussing this morning and we will be discussing in the days to come are things that Donald Trump said specifically he was going to do on the campaign trail. And him talking about General Milley is one of those things where we knew there would be some type of retribution, there would be some type of, review. The blanket pardon that former President Biden put in place did not come out of nowhere. It came from motivations and the belief that Trump would be going after Milley. So I think for generals right now, there is a question how to toe this line of supporting the President of the United States, and you're supporting the Constitution, and you're supporting the American people. And how does that dovetail? Is there going to be, this moment of saying those are not in line with each other, or how do you navigate doing it?
If you're President Biden, are you vindicated in issuing the preemptive pardon?
I think President Biden is like, I'm out. I'm in California. I'm not involved in this anymore. You guys did this. I don't know, but I will say, I don't necessarily think it's vindication. I don't think that President Biden ever wanted to be in this situation. Knowing President Biden's relationship with Milley and with the military and how strongly he feels about the military, I don't want to say that he feels vindicated in this. He should have never been put in this position. And I appreciate the spin you're trying to put on this for Republicans being, the political is dovetailing with the personal, but let's be clear here. This is completely personal on Trump's part, and he's doing this to Milley for retribution, just like you were saying. We know this. But to your point earlier and what we talked about on Monday a lot on this set, other countries are watching here, and this is just weakening America's place in the world with other countries because we are just letting China and other countries know we have all these weaknesses, and this is how you can get to us. And that, I think, is what the biggest takeaway mistake is going to be.
Well, let's be
Matt, a quick final word.
Let's be also honest. Milley's a political animal himself, right? That letter didn't get to Peter Bacon and Susan Glasser because it fell out of the window, right? Milley leaked a lot of this stuff, and look, that's his right. But there are also consequences if you're on the wrong side of this stuff when it comes to elections, and he is now seeing that political, personal doesn't matter. It's all the same.